Hello world, explorers and everyone out there. Today we're gonna look a little bit more into Polymer components or Polymer elements. Last week I had a presentation where I talked about HTML and web components and how a web element or a Polymer element looked, and today we're gonna go a little bit more into implementation and actually create an element from scratch. And I will go into how to do this. So we're gonna bootstrap an element. We are going to talk about the generated code that this bootstrapping does. We're gonna add some properties. We're gonna add some styling, some tests, and an implementation, and lastly we're going to create a demo for our element so we can see it in action. So to start this off, one tool that you can use is the Polymer CLI. It's a very handy tool to have. It's actually a bunch of tools that is integrated in one tooling, but you could use every tool separate and put them into your own gulp files and so on. So they are separate tooling, but the Polymer CLI has everything bundled in one package. So to install that, you install npm install polymer-cli and you will get the tooling. And to start off, we're going to do a Polymer init to initialize our project. And here we can initialize a bunch of different things. We can either create an element, which we are going to do today. We can bootstrap a blank application, which is a good starting point if you're going to do a small application in Polymer. And then you have this shop demo that you can bootstrap, so you can see how the shop works. And it has a lot of different elements, so you can watch them work together. And then we have the starter kit, and this is a few pages, some routing, localization and so on, and that could also be a good starting point if you are going to build a web page with a little bit more of an interface to it. So today we're going to create an element. I'm going to create this value pair element, and this is an element that shows an value with a label and presents a placeholder if the value isn't present. So that's the small description I gave it. And now it's going to do a Bower install. Polymer is using Bower because it has a flat structure, and all the dependencies between different elements, it actually goes from one element up one part in the category structure and then down into another element, which makes things much easier, and you can reuse a lot of elements. If you are using npm, it usually has a tree structure, so every element has all its dependencies in it and so on, which makes the code explode if you have a lot of things that depend on each other. So to use Polymer that can keep the structure lean. I know that there is a movement to use Yarn, which could have this flat structure. So I know there is an implementation for Yarn and npm packages, but I'm not sure if that is usable yet. So now we have bootstrapped our application, and in the readme file you can find some information how you could start off working with your element. And I'm going to go through pretty much everything that is said in this element, in this description, so we're not going to look further into that. And then we have our element, and this is the value pair element. It's a DOM module which has a very basic styling, and then we have this h2 tag which just says hello and a property value, and down here we have this property defined as value pair. So it will probably say hello value pair. So that's pretty much the element you get. And then we have an index file, which is actually a way to show this element off. So we're going to look at that presentation later on. But this will create a component page for you so you can see the element in action. And then we have some tests. And these tests are also quite simple. We have some boilerplate up here. Then we have a test fixture, which is the basic fixture. And down here in our suite, we are initializing the fixture. And then we look that this element is a value pair element, so that the is value in the element is equal to value pair. And last but not least, we have a demo page, and this demo page will show the element off in a demo snippet. And here you have just a simple template with the value pair component. And if we run Polymer serve, we will actually start an HTML server, which is hosting two different kinds of applications. Either you can look at an application, then you go to localhost 8080, or you can look at the reusable component, which is what we are trying to do today, and then you have to go to localhost 8080 components value pair. And this is because of this flat structure that I talked about, because everything in our element is actually pointing to things that is not there. So this other endpoint will change some of those bindings out so they actually find the different components. So if we open this one up, we will actually get an API reference with this prop value as a string and the default value for that string, which is very nice. So we already have an API documentation. And we have a demo page, which I talked about earlier, hello pair. So this very simple hello pair element will just show off in this demo page. So let's do some work then. What's next on our list? We're gonna add some properties. So in here we remove this prop1 because we don't need that one. We will add a label, which is a string. We will add a value, which also is a string. And last, we want a placeholder, which also should be a string. So that's the different properties we need for our element. Then we're going to create some styling. And first off, we need a div. And inside of this div, we want a label. And this then we want to show off the value as well, and that we do in a div as well. And we need some classes for these. So this is a container, and then we have our class label, and we have a class of value. And I also want to test this value later on, so I will give it an ID of value as well, so I can easily find it later on. And first the container, and let's just give the container a display flex. We put a flex direction on this as row. And we say justify content space between, so we get a separation between our different values in here. Then we have the label, and that is, we're gonna just give a font family of Roboto. We can say we give it a font size of 14 pixels. We can have a font weight of, let's say, 700. And our value, we give the same kind of styling, but we put a little bit bit less weight on it. So that should be very simple implementation of some styling, so it looks a little bit better. And then we will put some values in here. Here we can show off the label, and down here we will show off an actual function. So here we will show our value, and to show the value off, we want to give the function a value or a placeholder. So this is one way to implement this. We will look at a few different ways to implement it later, and we can put the function down here, and this function will just return the value at this point. So now we have a demoable part of our implementation, so we can actually look at it. So if we go to the demo page, we only need to supply a label, let's say date here, a placeholder of value missing, and last but not least a value of 2017-03-04. So if we go here to our demo page again, we can see that we actually have the presentation that we talked about, and if we look at the documentation, we have the properties that we see here. Now I see that the properties are not really well documented, so let's do some documentation as well. We go down here and go to the properties, we add some documentation for these. Let's say that this is a label for our value, and this is the value of this component, or the value presented with this component. And last we have a placeholder shown if the value isn't present. So this presented even. So this should be pretty good documentation for these. And to make things a little bit more interesting, we could actually go into our demo page and remove the placeholder. And if we do that, we see that the value has now disappeared. Why is that? This is because our function up here that we implemented requires both the value and the placeholder as input in order to trigger. So to fix this, so we always have a value in our component, we need to change the notation a bit. So we say this is a type string, and then we can give this a default value of the empty string. And I also want to add notify to these properties, and these notify values will actually tell all the components and everything that is dependent on this value if the value changes later on. So we have a more dynamic changing of this value. And I think that all these properties should have this notation, so I will add that to those as well. So now we can actually remove the placeholder, and the value will show up here as well. So let's go back to the demo page, see where do we have that, and we remove the placeholder, and now the value should show up even if the placeholder is missing, and the placeholder will later show up if the value is missing, and so on. So we don't need to specify any of the different values in order to trigger that function. So now we have done that, so let's go back to our to-do. We have added some properties, we have added some styling. Now we need to create some tests. To start off, we need to create a few text fixtures. We can create 3 of them. First off, we want a placeholder fixture, and this will be the placeholder only set. So only the value of placeholder will be foo in this case. And then we want something that shows value if present. And this one will have both the placeholder as a value, foo, and also the value set to bar. And the last one of these fixtures, see here, put them in the right order. So we have the basic, we keep that one, and the last one I'm gonna call an area test. We come back to that later on. So let's go down here and create the actual tests. So the first test is gonna use the placeholder, and in our element we actually set an ID for our value tag. So that ID was value, and we want to look into the tags. We want the inner HTML, and we also want to remove all spacing and all the air around, so breaks and so on. So we will trim it, and then we will look at this and see that that is foo. So this test is check that placeholder is shown if no value is assigned. And then we have one that show value if present. And that is the second one of these, and that should also be bar, I believe, because the placeholder is still foo, so we should show bar in this case. And the last area test, this fixture, I want to define all the values. So I want the label to be name, I want the placeholder to be foo, and I want the value to be bar. And this one is just so I will use all the elements and everything in it, and then I'm gonna add a new suit down here. So I want a A11Y suit, and to this we only supply the area test fixture. And this is actually an accessibility test. So it will test my fixture and see that all the different accessibility things are set up correctly. So we will also in this demo check that we actually have the right tags needed for accessibility for our element. And so let's run our tests here. We do Polymer test. This will run the test runner, and oh, wait a minute, there's one more thing I want to do before I run the test. I want to do a test configuration. This is not something that is required. You can actually skip to create a test configuration, but in my case I want to create it just to make the tests run faster. So we create a test conf JSON, and in this we will create a JSON object, and this JSON object will have plugins, And in the plugins that we have, one of them is local. And the local plugin will define a few browsers. And to make this run a bit faster, I will say that the only browser that I have is Chrome. I also have IE, but we don't need to run it in both. And then I want to add the skip update check. So it will not check for updates when it runs the test. And this will make it slightly faster to run. So let's run the tests again. And this will start the test runner and actually start Selenium and run through all these JavaScript tests and see if all the different values that we have defined are correct and give us a test result. So now the screen goes blank and the WebDriver runs, and we actually got a failed test. So in this case we run 6 tests. We have 3 normal tests defined, and then there's actually 3 area tests as well running. And one of them was that this foo value should be shown, but we actually just get empty string back because we haven't actually done anything to handle the placeholder yet. So now that we have created a few tests, we will go back to our element here and change a little bit of this functionality and set the placeholder instead, just to see that another test breaks, so we can get both of these tests to break. So when we run the test runner this time, I suppose that the other test we wanted it to be bar, and it will not it will return foo instead. And that's exactly what's happened. So both tests can fail because we haven't really done any real implementation here. So let's do the actual implementation. We look at value, and if value is not empty, we will return value, else we will return the placeholder. And this should probably be all that we need to do to actually implement the main functionality of this this element. So now I believe that all tests should pass. Let's look at that. Yeah, every test pass. So now 7 tests pass, which is great. And now that we have that thing in order, I'm actually going to look at my label up here, because there's one thing that I have missed. A label could be for an actual element. So in my case, I want this label to be for the ID of value. So these two should connect. And that means when the value is updated and read out, then this for value, this label should be read by the screen reader at the same time. So this is very good to supply for accessibility. So let's see here if this will give us even more tests that will work. Hopefully we will get a few more tests in the area suite running. Let's see here. Seems like everything was okay there. So now we have 9 tests running. The last thing that we can look into is the updatability of this tag. And we actually want to use this with the database. So we fetch data from a backend server and then show it in our element. So we will display the label, maybe show the placeholder because we don't have any value yet, and then go out to the network, fetch some data, and when we get the data back, we will actually change this value. And to make this a little bit more dynamic, for the screen readers, we could actually add one more tag. So in this case, we could add the area live tag, and this could have a few different values. Either it could be off, so it has no live element at all, or it could be assertive, and an assertive says that if the screen reader sees that this value changed, then it should interrupt anything that it says and then read this first, because this is very important. Or we could set it, as I want to do now, polite. And polite means that this value updates, so this is something that we want the user to know, that new data has arrived, but you don't need to interrupt the current flow of your reading of other elements. But when you have the time, please tell the user that this value has also changed. So now we have added that value as well. So we run our tests, see if they pass again. That would be nice. So waiting for the tests to run. This test runner is... oh, it's actually... is it running IE as well? So now it's run 12 tests. So we went from 9 to 12 tests. So that's really nice. Now we have a lot of different tests running on this suit, and it's well tested. It's well have the functionality that I believe I wanted to have. And now only thing we need to do is look into the demo and see that it is complete as well. So we start our server again. So we serve the component. We look at the documentation. Everything is here. And we look at the demo page. And here we can see that value pair with a label of date, placeholder of value missing, and a value of this value over here. And we see the actual demo up here. So I think that this is a quite nice demo. So I think we are done with our demo here. We have shown everything that we can use this element for. If we want, we could add one extra tag here. So let's say that we have 2 templates, just to make it a little bit more descriptive. Let's say basic value pair placeholder demo, and then just remove the value. So you say the value is empty here, so you can see in the demo that here we have value missing if the value is missing. Or we can even remove this so it becomes even clearer. So this is a way that we can show off how this element is working for us. So I hope that you learned something from this video, and looking forward to see you in the comment section. Please comment if you have any questions or if you want to communicate with me, and give it a like if you like it. Share it with your colleagues, your friends, and I really hope to see you in the next video.